I don't believe I got into this situation. It's really hard to explain, but I'll try. Part 1. The Will. I always believed I knew my father. Not perfectly, of course. No one really knows their parents completely, but I thought I understood the contours of his life. He was steady, practical, a man who worked with his hands and never spoke much about the past. We weren't affectionate. He wasn't the kind of father who told me he loved me every day, but he was present and, in his own stoic way, reliable. He was my anchor after my mother died when I was 10. From then on, it was just the two of us in that small 2-story house. We fought more often than we laughed, but we shared a life. That was supposed to be enough. When he passed away, the grief I felt was sharp, but simple. Or so I thought. What I didn't expect was for his death to rip my entire reality to pieces. The funeral was small and subdued. My father never had many close friends, and whatever family remained had drifted away years ago. I gave the eulogy, my voice breaking despite all my efforts to sound composed. I thought it was the closing chapter of his story, and mine. But the real shock came later, in a lawyer's office that smelled faintly of dust and old paper. The lawyer, Mr. Hawthorne, sat across from me, in his usual stiff posture. He'd been Dad's attorney for years, the man who handled taxes, contracts, and whatever legal knots Dad couldn't untangle himself. I expected routine: a house, a savings account, a modest inheritance for me, the only son. Instead, I walked into the office and saw her. She was already seated, a stranger about my age with dark hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. She looked nervous but composed, as if she had been practicing for this moment. "Who's this?" I asked, glancing at Hawthorne. "This is Sarah," he replied evenly, as though the name should mean something to me. The girl lifted her chin slightly. Her eyes, dark, steady, unsettlingly familiar, locked with mine. "I'm your sister," she said. The words made no sense. I laughed, bitter and incredulous. "That's impossible. My father didn't have a daughter. He only had me." But Hawthorne tapped the papers on his desk. "According to your father's will, dated 6 months ago, he leaves his entire estate to his daughter, Sarah Whitmore." The floor seemed to tilt under me. "What the hell are you talking about? That can't be right." But Hawthorne's face betrayed no doubt, and Sarah just sat there, her expression calm but wary, as if she had prepared for this moment. "You're not real," I snapped. "This is some kind of scam. Did you forge documents? Who put you up to this?" "I didn't forge anything," Sarah replied quietly. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "He was my father, too. I grew up knowing about you. He just never told you about me." My stomach lurched. For a split second, I saw him in her face. The slope of the jaw, the intensity in the eyes. Subtle, but there. "No," I muttered. "No. I'd know if I had a sister. He would have told me." But the will was there, black ink on white paper, signed by my father's own hand. And it left me nothing. I stormed out of Hawthorne's office, my thoughts colliding in a storm of anger and disbelief. That night, I tore through the house like a madman. Drawers, closets, old boxes in the attic. I was searching for something, anything to prove this Sarah was a fraud. Instead, I found a photograph. Buried deep in a box of old papers, it showed my father standing stiffly beside a woman I didn't recognize. She had one arm around the little girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old, with dark hair and a smile that sent a chill down my spine. Dad wasn't smiling, but there was something in the way his hand rested on the girl's shoulder, something protective, something fatherly. I dropped the photo like it burned. Was that her? Sarah? If so, then she wasn't lying. She had existed, all this time in some shadow life my father had chosen to keep hidden. The next day, I confronted Hawthorne. "This doesn't make sense," I said, slamming the will onto his desk. "Why would he leave everything to her? Why hide her from me my entire life?" He adjusted his glasses with maddening calm. "I can only tell you what your father instructed. His wishes were clear. He wanted Sarah to have everything." "And you didn't think that was strange?" "My role is not to pass judgment on the deceased," he replied smoothly. But there was something in his eyes, hesitation, discomfort, that told me he knew more. "Tell me the truth," I pressed. "Did he ever mention her before? Ever?" For a long moment Hawthorne was silent. Then he said, carefully, "Your father was a private man. There are things he chose not to share with either of you. I suggest you accept that." But I couldn't accept it. That night, I remembered the locked drawer in my father's desk, the one I had never been allowed to open. I had the key now. My hand shook as I turned it in the lock. The drawer slid open with a faint creak, revealing a stack of envelopes, old papers, and photographs. Birth certificates, letters, a few photographs of the woman from the picture, sometimes with the little girl, sometimes alone. One photo showed my father holding the girl in his arms, his expression uncharacteristically soft. And then, at the bottom of the drawer, a sealed envelope addressed to me. My breath caught as I tore it open. Inside was a letter, written in my father's neat, controlled handwriting. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone. There are things I never told you, things I never had the courage to explain. Sarah is your sister. She deserves a place in this family, though I failed her in life. Do not blame her for my mistakes. The will is my attempt to make things right." The words blurred as my vision swam with fury and disbelief. He knew. He had hidden her all these years and then handed her everything that should have been mine. Why? The letter didn't say. It only deepened the mystery. In the days that followed, Sarah tried to reach out. She called. She even came to the house once. I refused to let her in. But I couldn't stop thinking about her. If she truly was my sister, then she held answers I didn't. Still, I couldn't trust her. Not yet. Instead, I started digging. Public records, old newspaper clippings, anything I could find. But Sarah Whitmore's trail was faint, almost non-existent. No school records, no hospital files, no trace in any of the usual databases. It was as if she hadn't existed until recently. But I knew that couldn't be true. I had the photos. I had the letter. And the more I dug, the more I realized someone had gone to great lengths to erase her from the record. Late one night, Sarah showed up again. This time, I let her in. She stood in the living room, her eyes darting around the house like she was stepping into a dream. "I've been here before," she whispered. I froze. "What?" "She was little," she said. "He brought me here once, just once. I remembered the smell of the wood, the sound of the stairs creaking. He told me not to tell anyone, not even my mother." Her voice shook, and for the first time I saw the weight she carried. She wasn't gloating over her inheritance. She was searching too, searching for a father who had never fully claimed her. "Why now?" I demanded. "Why did he keep you hidden all these years?" "I don't know," she admitted. "He would visit sometimes, always in secret. I thought maybe he was ashamed of me." Her voice cracked. "But then he left me everything. I don't understand it either." Her confusion was real. Her pain was real. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that behind her sadness, behind her missing records, there was a deeper truth neither of us yet knew. That night, long after she left, I sat with the old documents spread out around me. One paper caught my eye, a hospital record, badly faded. It listed my name, the woman's name, and a child. But the child's name had been blacked out with thick ink. Why? Who was hiding it? And if Sarah is telling the truth...
Part 2. The Stranger Who Called Herself My Sister. The week after the will reading was a blur. I barely ate, barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that girl's face, Sarah's face, my so-called sister. I couldn't reconcile it. On one hand, I had the photographs and the letter, undeniable proof that my father had been hiding her. On the other, nothing about her existence added up. No records, no trace, as if she had been erased. It gnawed at me, a constant riddle I couldn't solve. She came back again on a rainy afternoon. I was in the kitchen, staring at the letter for the 100th time, when the knock came. When I opened the door, she stood there, soaked, her hair plastered to her face. She looked small, vulnerable, nothing like the confident girl who had sat in Hawthorne's office. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered quietly, her eyes darting around again, drinking in the familiarity of a house she half remembered. "I didn't know if you'd let me in," she said. "I almost didn't," I replied coldly. She acknowledged, accepting the hostility like she expected it. We sat at the table, a silence stretching between us. Finally, she reached into her bag and pulled out a worn photograph. It was the same woman from the box in the drawer, her mother, I assumed, standing in front of a shabby apartment building, holding Sarah as a toddler. "He visited sometimes, not often, but he was there. Birthdays, sometimes Christmas, always brief, always secret. My mom said he had another life he couldn't leave." Her voice cracked slightly. "I knew about you, though. She told me you were the reason he couldn't stay." The words hit me like a punch. Me? I was the reason he abandoned her? "That's not true," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "And with me, he acted like you were all he wanted." The tension between us was unbearable, a mirror of pain and betrayal we both carried. Over the next hours, she told me fragments of her life. Growing up with a mother who struggled financially, never understanding why her father only showed up in shadows. The secrecy, the shame, the longing. Part of me pitied her. Another part resented her for existing, for being the reason my father split himself in two. But then she showed me something else. A stack of letters, handwritten, folded carefully, each signed by my father. They weren't love letters, not exactly. They were apologies, promises, confessions. He wrote about me, about the burden of keeping two families apart, about his fear of everything collapsing if the truth came out. The handwriting was his, the details, the tone. It was him. And yet I couldn't escape the thought, if he cared so much, why did he never tell me? That night, after she left, I spread the letters across my desk. My father's words blurred together, heavy with guilt. But one line stood out, repeating in different letters. "When the time is right, everything will go to her. It's the only way to make things right." Her. Sarah. It was intentional, deliberate. I wanted to tear the letters apart, but instead I shoved them back into the envelope, my hands shaking. He chose her over me. The days bled together. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't carry on normal conversations. My friends stopped asking how I was doing because the answer was always the same: not well. Instead, I poured every spare moment into investigating Sarah. If she was real, if she was my sister, there would be a trail somewhere, a school, a doctor, something. But the deeper I dug, the stranger it became. Her birth certificate existed, yes, but it was issued late, years after her supposed birth. No hospital records, no early school enrollment, like she simply appeared in the system halfway through her childhood. I hired a private investigator. He came back after a week with a puzzled look. "It's the damnedest thing," he said. "It's there, but not really. Documents, but no depth. Like someone planted the basics, but scrubbed the rest." "Scrubbed?" I repeated. He nodded. "Someone with influence, connections. This wasn't an accident. Whoever wanted her invisible did a good job." The implications chilled me. I confronted Sarah with what I found. She seemed genuinely shocked. "I didn't know," she whispered. I thought my mom just never kept records. We moved a lot. She didn't talk about details." "Convenient," I muttered. Anger flashed in her eyes. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I asked to grow up in the shadows? To be his secret? I hated it. I hated him for it." Her voice cracked, and suddenly she was crying, her shoulders shaking. Something inside me shifted then. For the first time, I believed her pain was real. Maybe she wasn't the enemy. Maybe she was just another victim of his lies. But the questions didn't stop. Why had my father erased her? Why leave her everything at the end? And why was Hawthorne so evasive every time I pushed? I decided to test Sarah. I asked her questions only someone close to him could answer. Favorite foods, routines, small quirks. She answered some easily. Poker nights, the way he always fixed the squeaky stair but never replaced it, the scar on his hand from a broken bottle years ago. Things I remembered too. But other questions made her pause. When did he start his job at the factory? What was his army regiment? She faltered, gave vague answers. I caught the hesitation. I stored it away. She knew enough to be convincing, but maybe not everything. A week later, I returned to Hawthorne's office unannounced. He looked annoyed, but I didn't care. I slammed the folder of Sarah's suspicious documents onto his desk. "Tell me what you know," I demanded. "All of it, because this doesn't make sense." He sighed heavily, removing his glasses. For the first time, he looked tired, old. "Your father was complicated," he said slowly. "He had obligations, people he owed, promises he couldn't keep. Sarah was part of that. She was never supposed to exist, at least, not on paper, but she did, and he loved her in his way." "Obligations? What kind of obligations?" But he clammed up again, retreating into his lawyerly shell. "I've said too much already. Leave it be. The will is final. Accept it." But I couldn't, not when every answer only led to more questions. That night, I returned to the locked drawer, combing through every document again. This time, I noticed something I'd overlooked: a bank statement, a large sum withdrawn in cash over and over, month after month. The withdrawals lined up with the years Sarah grew up. He had been supporting her secretly. But where did the money go? And why cash? Another secret, another shadow. The next time Sarah came over, I showed her the statements. She was stunned. "I never saw this money. Mom always struggled. We barely scraped by." "Then where the hell did it go?" Her silence was answer enough. She didn't know, or she was hiding something. And then another thought struck me. What if her mother wasn't just a secret lover? What if she was part of something else? Something bigger my father never wanted me to uncover. By the end of that week, one truth had crystallized. Sarah was not the whole mystery. She was only the surface. Beneath her existence lay a deeper story. My father had buried so carefully it was only now beginning to crack open. And if I wanted the truth, I'd have to dig further than I ever imagined, even if it destroyed what little remained of my family.
Part 3. The cracks in the story. Grief had long since given way to obsession. I no longer thought of my father as the man who raised me. I thought of him as a stranger, someone whose real life had slipped through my fingers like smoke while I lived in ignorance. And Sarah, my alleged sister, was both the key and the lock. I needed her to understand him, but the more I learned about her, the more questions surfaced. I started with the bank withdrawals. They were consistent, monthly, always in large sums of cash, thousands of dollars over years, enough to support a second family, yes, but Sarah claimed they had struggled, and her life stories backed that up. So where did the money go? I traced the withdrawals back to different banks. No pattern, no clear trail, until one statement caught my eye. A deposit, not a withdrawal. Large, sudden, almost like a payoff. But from who? And for what? I went back to Hawthorne. You knew, I accused, about the money, about everything. What was my father involved in? His jaw tightened. He said nothing, just stared at me with that lawyer's mask. But silence can be more revealing than words. You're protecting him, I said, or someone else. Who? Finally, he spoke. Some truths will not bring you peace. Walk away while you still can. It wasn't advice. It was a warning. Sarah and I met again in the diner where Dad used to take me every Sunday morning. The place smelled of burnt coffee and bacon grease, exactly as it always had. She looked out of place there, her neat blouse damp from the rain, her eyes tired. Why here? She asked. Because this was his place, I said. And maybe if you really knew him, you'd remember. Her gaze swept the booths, the counter, the old jukebox in the corner. And then she whispered, He brought me here once. I had pancakes. He said it was his special spot. A chill prickled my skin. She wasn't lying. We sat in silence until I slid the bank statements across the table. She scanned them, her brow furrowing. I told you, I never saw this money. Mom never had it. She was always broke. Then where did it go? I asked. She shook her head, frustrated. Maybe he spent it on something else. Maybe... No, I cut in. This was regular, planned. He was paying someone. The question is, who? Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't argue. A few days later, the private investigator I'd hired called me. His voice was sharp, urgent. You need to see this, he said. We met in a dim bar downtown. He slid a file across the table. Inside were records, grainy copies, faded papers. One name leapt out at me. Margaret Ellis. Sarah's mother. According to the records, she'd once been tied to a company my father had worked with briefly years ago, a shell corporation that dissolved mysteriously with whispers of fraud. She wasn't just his lover, the investigator said. She was involved in something with him, something they didn't want public. Fraud, shell companies, hidden money. My father wasn't just a man with a secret child, he was a man with a secret past. I confronted Sarah that night.
She was waiting for me on the porch, a nervous look on her face. "I think someone's been watching me," she blurted as soon as I arrived. "What?" She nodded. "A car, parked near my apartment. The same one, different nights. I thought I was imagining it, but now—" Fear edged her voice, and for once I believed her. I handed her the file. "Your mother. She was tied to Dad's company. Fraud, money, who knows what else. Did you know about this?" Her eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. "No. She never told me anything about him, except that he couldn't stay. She never mentioned business." "Maybe she didn't want you to know." "Or maybe she didn't know herself," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "What if he used her too?" The thought hadn't occurred to me, but it made a sick kind of sense. The following week, I dug deeper into the shell company. Its trail was faint, but I found whispers of lawsuits, sealed settlements, names of investors who vanished into silence. And then I found a note, scribbled in my father's handwriting, tucked into one of his old ledgers. "If anything happens, tell her the truth. She deserves at least that." Her, not me, always her. I crumpled the note in my fist, rage boiling. Why was she always the one he thought deserved the truth? Why not me? Sarah and I grew closer in a strange, reluctant way. We fought constantly, suspicion bubbling beneath every conversation, but we were bound by the same need: answers. She told me stories of her childhood, little things that rang true. The smell of his cologne, the way he always carried loose change in his pocket, the scar in his hand. But there were gaps, whole years she couldn't account for, times when he simply disappeared. And those were the years the money moved most frequently. One night, unable to sleep, I drove to Sarah's apartment. She lived in a cramped building on the edge of town. The car she'd mentioned was there, parked across the street. I approached slowly, memorizing the plate. The windows were too dark to see inside. But as I stood there, the engine started. The car pulled away smoothly, disappearing into the night. They knew I had seen them. When I told Sarah, she paled. "What if it's connected to him, to whatever he was hiding?" I said. "Then we're in more danger than we realized," I said grimly. That was the first night she stayed at my house. We barely spoke, the silence heavy with fear and confusion. But in some strange way, it felt almost normal, like siblings caught in the same storm. A few days later, the investigator called again. His voice was tense. "Your father wasn't just hiding a family," he said. "He was hiding a crime. Big one. Money laundering, maybe worse. And I think Sarah's mother was right in the middle of it." My chest tightened. "Are you saying Sarah might not be his daughter at all?" There was a pause. "I'm saying the evidence is conflicting. Some documents suggest yes. Others suggest she was planted, inserted into the system. Whether she's blood or not, I can't say for sure." The world tilted again. If Sarah wasn't my sister, then who the hell was she? That night, I found her sitting in the living room, staring at the old photo of Dad and the little girl. "Do you ever think he hated us?" she asked suddenly. "What?" "Hated us both. Me, because I was a mistake. You, because you reminded him of the life he couldn't leave. Maybe the will wasn't about love. Maybe it was about guilt." I didn't know how to answer, because deep down I feared she was right. But the final crack came when I discovered another letter in the bottom of that desk drawer, one I had missed before, sealed in an envelope marked only with initials, M.E. Margaret Ellis. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a confession, my father's words, raw and desperate. They'll come for you if they know. Keep her safe. She can't know who she really is, not yet. I stared at the words until they blurred. She can't know who she really is. Not my sister, not his daughter. Something else. And suddenly everything I thought I knew collapsed into dust.